Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
My guest this week is Micah Lowe, who is the owner of Simply O3, which is an ozone equipment company, as well as doctorsozone.com, which is an instructional platform to allow physicians access to protocols and educational training. Micah and I discuss in this episode different routes of administration for ozone therapy, some of the physiology behind ozone, and discuss his brother's long journey with brain cancer and how that was a factor that led to Micah getting into this space. I think you'll find this podcast very introductory from an ozone standpoint, and hopefully you will want to integrate this into your practice after you hear Micah talk. Without further introduction, please enjoy my conversation with Micah Lowe. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Micah Lowe, who is the owner of Simply O3 and Doctors Ozone. And Micah and I are going to chat about ozone therapy and maybe some other cool stuff. You talked about cold thermogenesis, immersion. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. But Micah, thank you for joining us, and tell us how you got to this place in the ozone world.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So, as far as my backstory is concerned and how I got into this, it's a very long story, so I'm not going to share every detail. But essentially, at a higher level, my brother was diagnosed with a rare brain cancer. And at the time, our family was pretty oriented towards conventional medicine. So we went through the conventional school of thought, got him in with Johns Hopkins, which is the poster child of cancer care and cutting edge type deal. But, he lived past what they expected. And I can't say that was or was not due to the interventions that they were providing. I think not. I think it was more just his constitution that allowed him to live past what they expected. But it got to a point where they said, hey, we don't really have anything that we can do for you, but we can try some experimental stuff. So it's either just kind of go home, there's nothing else, or you can give these experiments, which we think will work. And the experimental route really just turned him more into a stat line, a guinea pig for the medical system. So for example, there was this extremely toxic drug that they wanted him to take. But for it to have any sort of benefit for the type of brain cancer that it had, you had to have a certain genotype, so a certain set of genes. Mm-hmm. And that genotype was only found in 13% of people, so not very many people had it. But you know what? They didn't even bother testing him for this genotype. They just wanted to take him to take the drug to see what would happen. So, and that wasn't an isolated incident. They had some experimental open brain surgeries and different things that they were doing. So Matt started to lose a lot of his critical thinking processes and just, his overall faculties, and kind of led me down a road of like, well, what else is out there that could potentially help Matt? And at the time, not even thinking like cure cancer, but, what could potentially help him in terms of quality of life that isn't so toxic, isn't going to be so invasive, and is not just cut, burn, or poison. So along the road, we found hyperbaric oxygen, which was massively helpful for him. It greatly improved his quality of life, greatly improved his energy. when he was doing like chemotherapy and radiation, greatly diminished the negative side effects of those things.
Right.
And that was it was it was a big time investment, but a relatively simple thing in terms of like its availability. It wasn't very difficult for us to find a place to be able to do this. And it was massively beneficial. So it's like, man, so this has worked really quite tremendously, more than I anticipated. What else is out there? And so down the line of oxidative treatments, my dad was getting involved in the industry around the same time, and he was working on something called ultraviolet blood irradiation, and I was working with him on that project, and Matt was involved with us as well. And a lot of those doctors doing this treatment, ultraviolet blood irradiation, were also doing something called ozone therapy. And I'd pick up the phone and talk to these doctors, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm using ozone for diabetic ulcers, or I have a patient with Lyme disease that just turned around and is doing so much better, or I have a patient with an autoimmune disorder and they've gotten tremendous results using ozone therapy. So that kind of piques your interest because you see, I'd look up ozone therapy and see like, hey, here's like 100 diseases that it works with. And in my mind, that's a red flag, right? Especially when you're conventionally thinking.
Right.
It's like, well, there's not things that work for 100 different things, but that really piqued my interest. And I started to go into the literature and read about it and get an understanding of it, and found that, well, it does actually work with a lot of these things because it's not the ozone therapy that's doing the work. It's actually your body. The ozone therapy is a catalyst or a stimulus to balance out very complex systems in your body. And then your body in turn is able to heal and manage itself more effectively. And I'm not saying that it's like the best thing since sliced bread. It's another tool in the toolbox that's really helpful. But that was kind of how I got started with ozone therapy, was through that journey. And what I started to do was started to read a lot of the studies, because there was a lot of research on it. At the time, I think there was over 1,800 medical studies on it. But if you wanted to go and find out, hey, what is the state of the art? What is the consensus on how ozone therapy works with cancer? You'd have to sit and read 100 to 200 studies to get like a pretty good understanding of it.
Right.
So it was very time intensive. So I was like, well, I got some time. I can read all these studies, and then I can just document what I'm learning, turn it into an article, and provide that to people. And that actually, that kind of took off. Like a lot of people were, found it very helpful, very useful. And I was continued to do it because I was getting rewarded with like, good job. This is so helpful. This is amazing. This saved me so much time, that kind of thing. And down the road, that turned into, the ozone therapy training and the business. And it's kind of been a process of just trying to make this therapy more aware, more people aware of this therapy since then. And that's really how I got started.
It's really interesting because in Europe, Spain, Germany, Italy, ozone is really quite rudimentary. It's just part and parcel. Hardly anybody questions it or anything like that. But yeah, here in the United States, there's either a complete ignorance of ozone therapy, or there's pushback. Oh, that's, functional medicine. It's woo-woo, all of these different things. Did you kind of experience some of that with the guys at Hopkins when your brother was going through the therapy, or?
Oh, we didn't tell him much. And Matt wasn't. Oh, and I didn't mention Matt did pass away, so we didn't get rid of his brain cancer, but he did live far past what was expected. So he was diagnosed around 18 and passed away at about 42. Helped me work on this project for about 6 years, but yeah, they weren't too aware of some of the treatments that we were doing, or if they were, they weren't too interested in them. So they weren't giving much pushback. And Matt wasn't. He was kind of half in, half out to the natural line of thinking. Like he was kind of like, yeah, I'll do some of these natural or integrative approaches, but not at the expense of the conventional. And I think part of that was due to losing some of his critical thinking processes, and like, hey, Matt, this is not looking good. I mean, you just had this experimental open brain surgery, landed you in a coma for 2 months. Like, where do you, and you don't have any upside from it. Like, it didn't help. Like I don't think he was thinking super clearly in that sense, and was just kind of going down the road, and probably felt defeated to a degree, not really knowing exactly what to do. And, not everybody like can take it's funny because you can have something like ozone oil for diabetic ulcers.
Right.
It's wonderful. It works really well. But if I tell that to a doctor, they're not going to listen to me, even if they're a family member. They would listen to another doctor who's in a white coat, though. So people just tend to listen to the person in the white coat and not give a whole lot of thought to, well, I'm not a doctor, but I have worked really hard to understand this stuff and how it works. And here's a study on like what its effect is on this indication. So there's been a number of times that people with herniated discs, they are complaining about their herniated disc, how much pain it's giving them, and that kind of thing. And I'm like, there's a therapy you can do for like $400 to $600 that has a 68% success rate, which isn't too far off of surgery, and it's relatively non-invasive. And they just don't listen. They're not in that mindset. And so, yeah, I just don't think he quite acquired the mindset that I think would have been more helpful to him.
Well, Micah, for the audience, let's talk about some of the different properties that ozone, medical grade ozone can do. And, I think we should talk about the fear factor first. Some people will say, well, it's extremely dangerous. The fact of the matter is that unless you inhale it, it's not very dangerous at all. It's pretty safe, really. So you want to touch on some of the things, the properties that ozone does do?
Yeah, so it's not dangerous when it's used in the right modality. So there is one thing you can't do, which you said, you can't breathe it. And so that's not too far off of the line of thinking that we already have. Like there's a lot of things you can't put into your lungs that you could put into your mouth or, put onto your skin or vice versa or whatever. Like there's certain molecules and certain interventions that can be used in one part of the body, but not in others. It's the exact same thing with ozone therapy. And there's a reason for it. So the reason that you can't breathe ozone is because there's no antioxidant buffering system. So the antioxidants are the things that bind with the ozone when it's introduced to a part of the body. But in our lungs, we don't have that. So what happens is when you breathe in the ozone, it's a strong oxidant, which means it can break down materials, it can be irritating, that kind of thing. So when you breathe it in, you get coughing, you get some inflammation, and it's overall just not great on the lungs. So you don't want to breathe it in. But that antioxidant buffering system is present in pretty much every other part of the body. So you can put it into the ears, you can put it into the blood, can go into the colon, into the vagina for like infertility issues and things of that nature. So it can be used in these other components of the body. And this has been studied for a long time. Like the real research started back in the 60s, and it has a longer history than that, but like really like diving into it and starting to get an understanding of the biochemical action and how it's working in the body. And we know exactly what the antioxidant threshold is in each part of the body. And it does differ based on the person to a degree and that kind of thing. But we know what the dosing range needs to be. We know how much needs to be applied before it uses up all those antioxidants, and then it starts to actually irritate the tissue there. And we always keep it under that range. So that's why it can be safely used. Also, there was an assessment done by the International Scientific Committee of Ozone Therapy that assessed over 300,000 IV ozone treatments. They found an adverse event rate, which means there was, and none of them were dangerous, but it means there was something not ideal with the therapy or it caused a problem. It was 6 in every 100,000 treatments, which for frame of reference is lower than the use of aspirin, so extremely safe. And the adverse events that they did have were typically due to malpractice in that they're applying a drug called heparin to the blood to prevent it from clotting. So during the course of an IV ozone therapy, they draw blood out, they apply this heparin into the blood so that it doesn't clot, and then put it back into the patient. But if the patient has prescription blood thinners or anemia or something like that, they can't use heparin. So that was really the major cause of the adverse reactions, which were already super, super low. So, and on top of that, you have now over 2,500 medical studies, and those range in credibility. So some are double blinds, clinical trials, all the good stuff, the stuff that we really like to see from a science perspective. On the other side of it, you do have practitioners that are just making observations. These are 5 patients that I had. This is how I did the ozone therapy, and these were the results. So they do range in credibility. But what I'm seeing from all these different studies is this massive theme that ozone therapy is safe, because this is not 2,500 medical studies from one institution that's just has a bias on ozone therapy. This is from all over the world by independent groups that are researching ozone therapy and really trying to get an understanding of it. So I feel fully confident in the safety of ozone therapy. the only context that you really can't use it is to directly breathe ozone gas into the lungs.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of other considerations that I've experienced. We've been using ozone for about 4 or 5 years now. I've read of a few reports where people were just injecting large boluses of medical grade ozone gas intravenously, and that seemed to be maybe a problem here and there versus putting it into the blood that you've taken out and then reintroducing that, which I've never seen really anything. In our practice, I've never seen any complications. Now, occasionally we'll get a Herxheimer reaction because of the effect of the ozone therapy on whatever it is that is being treated, and but that's really not a complication of ozone.
Yeah, that's just the immune system turning
Right.
on, starting to kill off all the pathogens, and then you get a lot of endotoxins released at the same time. And if your detox pathways aren't working well, those
Right.
build up and can cause some problems. But yeah, there's differences in protocols. So there is one called DIV, which is they're doing ozone gas straight into to the vein. But that's a condemned method, meaning that like all the scientific institutions, the academics say don't do DIV. And there's a few exceptions to that people use it and say it's totally safe. But the reason is because it does regularly have adverse side effects, like it'll burn up the vein permanently and discontinue that vein. Chest tightness, anxiety are both really common. I have not seen a case personally that somebody has died from an embolism on it. There was one, but they were not using a medical grade ozone generator, and they were just taking room air and pumping it into the person. And these were people that were charlatans. They were posing as doctors when they really weren't, and they were just trying to milk this lady for money. So that was one case, but it was like totally outside. So DIV, yeah, we say don't do that because it's the only therapy that regularly has adverse events. It's much easier to do wrong. Whereas pulling out the blood first, so we draw out some blood, then mix in the ozone gas into the blood, and then put the blood back in. That
Right.
seems to be a really great way to do it.
Right. And that's what we initially started with. And, we found that very useful. Now, what I have kind of gone into now more of a routine is rectal insufflation, because if we can get these patients, and we're dealing with a lot of very severe neuropathic patients, and if we can get them basically a modality or an administration route that they can do more frequently at home, while the initial setup cost is a little bit, after several treatments, it's far more inexpensive for them to do it that way. And I think we have a better regimen for getting more frequent treatments, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think the the ozone enema, the rectal insufflation, yes, we use that word. I have some friends that are like, I never know what to expect. Sometimes you just drop a word like rectal insufflation, or they're
Yeah.
outside of the medical thing. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, it's an extremely helpful and effective modality to apply ozone therapy because it does have a systemic response. So when you push the ozone gas into the colon, it bonds with it basically goes to the mucosal wall, creates some lipid peroxide. So it is a small stress. Anytime you apply ozone therapy, it causes a small stress in the body, but that's exactly what we want. It's called a hormetic therapy. Exercise, ice bath, sauna, same thing. We're causing a small stress so the body builds back stronger. So it creates these lipid peroxides and these other properties absorbed into the portal vein, going up to the liver, distributed throughout the body. And what happens in turn is that you get immune balancing, you get improved oxygen efficiency, which is better stamina, better energy, better utilization of oxygen to create energy. You get a mitigation or a reduction of chronic oxidative stress, which is theorized to be the leading cause of aging and disease. So that's a really good thing because we're now endogenously or naturally producing antioxidant enzymes, so antioxidants are cell protection. They're great for preconditioning. They do all sorts of amazing work in the body, and they're extremely necessary. So if we can get our body to naturally produce those, that's a much better state to be in. And than just supplementing them. Supplementing them is great. I take glutathione and the good antioxidants and that kind of stuff. But if I could have my body naturally doing that very effectively, that's the ideal scenario. And the fourth thing is it really, really helps with microcirculation, which is blood flow delivery of nutrients to areas and offloading of byproducts. So yeah, even the rectal insufflation has all those fantastic systemic benefits to it.
And I think you make an excellent point, that, what happens with the ozone is very quickly, like if it's mixed with a liquid like blood or the mucosa of the colon or the rectum, instantly you go into the peroxidase formation, and then that's, the ozone isn't there. I mean, it gets converted to other things very quickly that upregulate the immune system. Now, topical ozone has the benefit of your very virucidal, bactericidal natures of it, as well as you're going to get a little bit of maybe a lot. I really don't. We've done some limb bagging and some infiltration of ozone circumferentially around ulcers, and it does increase the local blood flow, the perfusion there. But I think you also have the benefit of the virucidal or bactericidal effects of the ozone gas itself.
Yeah, so if you apply ozone gas to a topical like wound or infection or that kind of thing, it's doing a couple things. It's helping to eliminate the infection. Both the ozone does that, and then it also stimulates the body to create hydrogen peroxide in the skin naturally, which hydrogen peroxide our body does make. It needs it for immune response, and it kills bad cells. So it does those two things. And then it also helps to stimulate growth factor. So you're increasing the amount of growth factor, which is going to speed up the healing time. So that's why it's really helpful in the case of diabetic ulcers, MRSA, even things as severe as gangrene. It can be extremely helpful on, because it's able to eliminate the infection and stimulate the healing process. I actually had this, I think it was like 2 years ago now, but I was outside with my kids. So I have 4 young kids, and one of them was like 1.5 at this time. So he's toddling around and he's just a little kid. But our neighbor's cat came over, and he was kind of harassing my toddler Wesley. So I was like, and he was a nice cat, I liked him and everything, but I was like, hey, you kind of seem on edge, I'm going to take you back home. So I go over to pick him up, and he did not like that at all. So he sunk his teeth into my arm, as deep as I've ever had a cat bite. But I didn't think much of it. As like, I just got bit by a cat, whatever. But the next day, my arm was swollen up to my elbow, and it continued to like travel up my arm. So I was like, oh, shoot. Started to look into it, and it's like, yeah, if you let it go and you don't eliminate the infection, this can travel, turn into a systemic infection and cause a lot of problems, have to get IV antibiotics, potentially do surgery and all those kinds of things. So I'm like, oh, shoot. Well, I don't want that to happen. So I started to apply ozone oil. And do the bagging, and it cleared it up in a couple days. I did end up getting some antibiotics from my practitioner as a just in case I do need these. I didn't end up needing them at all. It was able to clear up the infection relatively quickly and get rid of it. So it's really, really good for any sort of lesions or skin infections or things of that nature.
Well, that brings up a couple of things I wanted to ask you about that I really don't know the answer to. We're talking about these different routes of administration. Now, there are some things in the literature about the analgesic properties of ozone, and we've had experience where we've actually injected ozone subcutaneously in very neuropathic areas, and it's wonderful, tremendous, very quick benefit from an analgesic standpoint. And then also, we've put ozone into, like a painful ankle joint, and the pain miraculously just goes away. And what do you think the mechanism of action is for the analgesia?
Are you doing just ozone gas, or are you doing the prolozone mixture where you're using?
No, just ozone gas, but I've used the prolozone too. So that's not quite as clear cut, because you don't know if it's the other agents that you're mixing it with.
Right. Yeah. Because there's procaine and that kind of stuff in there, which usually gets rid of the pain. But yeah, in regards to ozone, I don't think we exactly understand the mechanisms in that respect yet. So, but it does seem to have an analgesic effect. So there's some studies that basically make a argument for which pain pathways it's working with. So there's definitely people looking into it, but I think it still needs to be uncovered a bit more. To my understanding, unless there's some research out there that I haven't read yet. But it definitely works with the pain pathway. So people typically will have some degree alleviation of pain, and that differs person to person. So some people don't really experience that much pain alleviation while others do, and I can't say exactly why that is.
No, that's the same thing that we'd seen in our clinical experience. But I have some patients that have tremendous, very painful neuropathic conditions. Usually it's more the Lyme patients or the severe mold toxicity patients. And they will be able to tell you that if I give myself a rectal insufflation of ozone, it's almost instantaneous pain relief. Now, it may not last for more than an hour or 2 hours in some of the folks, but it breaks it up enough that it allows them to get ahead of the curve a little bit.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor.
Well, folks, if you are over 40 and you are not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really think that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention its cardio protection. If you have any question on nitric oxide, I suggest that you go back and listen to the Pot of Inquiry, Season 1, Episode 3, for my conversation with one of the world's experts, Dr. Nathan Bryan. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important I believe it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett, all lowercase, at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pot of Inquiry. Use Pot of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I'm certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see every one of those patients will be nitric oxide deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them up immediately. Now, thanks to Approved Medical Solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of strange. I mean, I think it helps with the microcirculation, but some people that I've talked to will be like, yeah, my back pain went away or this or that. Why did it do that? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I really, we know the microcirculation aspect, which might make some sense, and helping with inflammation and mitigating the inflammation, mitigating the chronic oxidative stress, but how quickly that happens doesn't quite line, at least our understanding, doesn't really quite line up with some of these experiences people are having. So yeah, I can't say exactly what's going on there, but there definitely does seem to be some sort of pain relief aspect to it.
Yeah, it's something I've done a fair amount of research on, and I can't quite get an idea of what the mechanism of action is. But I've had enough people tell me that I have no doubt that they are experiencing a reduction in pain. They have this analgesic effect because it's not just from one patient and one type of patient. So it's an interesting thing because you deal with these very complex pain situations, and anything that you can do, albeit even a very small integral, can make a change for the folks. And so if you can make a change and you're not causing any harm, where are we going wrong?
Yeah. It is an interesting subject because it's an extremely versatile tool. I mean, we already covered like some of its use in cancer care a little bit, and I can go more into that, but skin infections, pain pathways, herniated discs, like how does this thing work with all those systems? And yeah, we don't know exactly all the mechanisms. We have a basic understanding of how it's working. We definitely have a lot of clinical outcomes. So basically a doctor can apply it to a group of patients and say, this is where they were at beforehand, and this is where they were at afterwards. But that doesn't tell you like, hey, what is happening inside the body? It's just telling you what the outcome was and how it benefited the patient. So there's a lot of clinical experiences out there with ozone therapy, like you said, the pain pathways that are still being researched, and I can't say how actively that one specifically, but are still being researched. And usually the clinical experience comes before the scientific research. So there has to be enough people saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing, to encourage a scientist to go, maybe this is something worth looking into and trying to figure out how it's working with these different mechanisms and how it approaches the body differently based on the person's need. It is a really fascinating molecule too. There was a study done on patients who had a stroke, and then there were some healthy patients in the group too, but they were trying to identify like how does it affect blood flow in the brain. And what they found was if there was a hypoxic part of the brain, meaning it's not getting correct oxygen delivery, that part of the brain would get a boost of oxygen delivery, circulation, and all the things that it needs, whereas other parts of the brain that were healthy and functioning didn't get as much of a boost. So it was almost like intelligent, and also in the healthy people, they just didn't really get a boost. So it was almost like intelligent in the way that it approached the body. But that's the thing with ozone is it's not the ozone, it's the stimulus for your body to do the work. And so it's truly the intelligence of your body that we're able to engage with this molecule.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you made a great point at the beginning where you can use ozone for almost anything because you're upregulating the human. And and so you are having these very beneficial effects from the ozone therapy. We know that it helps with heme oxygenase 1 to offload oxygen off the heme molecules, so it's not bound as tight. I believe there's a pretty significant interplay between ozone and nitric oxide, which would go into the circulatory, and that biophysiology is way above my pay grade, but we know that nitric oxide is pretty important. But one of the things that I've come across from a research standpoint that looks like it has been pretty heavily researched is the use of ozone in conjunction with chemotherapy, because it showed that there's, like you mentioned this with your brother's case, there's tremendous benefit from mitigating the side effects, particularly in peripheral neuropathy that is induced by chemotherapeutic agents by the co-administration of ozone throughout these therapeutic windows, so to speak.
Yeah, and overall quality of life vastly improves. It's something like there was one study that showed like a 70% improvement in quality of life of patients and they had a control. So patients who were undergoing chemotherapy, doing ozone therapy, and then patients just undergoing chemotherapy without ozone therapy. The patients that did ozone therapy had a massive improvement in pretty much all parameters in terms of quality of life. So sleep, energy, contentment, all that kind of stuff was a huge improvement. And it didn't seem to diminish the effects of the chemo. And I know chemotherapy, everybody has their opinions, but it didn't seem to diminish the effects of the chemo that they were trying to get out of it. So it's a great adjunctive. I always say, if you know anybody who is undergoing chemotherapy, this to me is a no-brainer, because you're going to get a massive reduction in the negative side effects. They're going to have more energy. They're going to be more content. They're not going to feel as sick, not going to feel as nauseous, and they're still going to get the effects of chemotherapy that they're looking for. So I think that's where it has a massive fit into modern day medicine. Again, I know there's a lot of opinions on chemo, but I think that could be a really easy partnership between ozone therapy and chemotherapy patients.
I don't see any reason why somebody would say that's not, an optimal way to treat someone, because if you can mitigate the side effects without mitigating the efficacy of a treatment, why would you not?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's just like you said, ozone therapy, it's kind of interesting that overseas, like it's used more often. And there's about 20 countries that it's approved in, a little bit over that. And so there's over 20 countries that are saying, yeah, ozone therapy is approved. It's good to be used. It's useful in this, and this situation. Whereas just in the United States, it's not FDA approved. And there's reasons for that. I think the biggest one is because it's not a big moneymaker, so it doesn't garner investors, and it's just not going to get a lot of support around it financially to be able to make a push towards the FDA. I think it's possible within the next 10 years that we make a run for FDA approval, but it takes a lot of time because you have to build up a lot of really just a lot of money to be able to do something like that. And it's not like this fast track, like this drug that a customer has to take for the rest of their life at a crazy margin. It's like you're using oxygen, you get the machine once, and then you're kind of good to go. Even on the practitioner side, I mean, they're making some money on administering the IVs, but it's not anything like putting somebody on a drug for the rest of their life. I mean,
Right.
that's called customer lifetime value. Is like there's a difference between somebody that buys $1,000 machine and somebody who takes a $40 monthly subscription of a prescription for 50 years. Like
Right.
it's a massive difference there. And so drugs generally get through FDA approval because they have a lot of investors behind it that are looking at it as a financial opportunity, not always like, hey, this is going to help humanity, help the world. And I wish there was more of that. There certainly is some people that are kind of altruistic in that way, that want to see good things come to humanity. But the system at large, I think, is more oriented towards finances.
Yeah. Well, if somebody could patent O3, it would be up there at the FDA right now, because there would be a way that they could monetize it. And, so, well, I think there's a lot of, we could go on, talk about all of the benefits. So let's talk about some of the training that you all are doing, so that if a practitioner out there who's listening to this podcast wants to get involved. I know that when I first started looking into the ozone, I thought it was going to be a bigger hurdle, a bigger barrier to entry than it really was. And I'm sure that if I would have known about your program, it might have been a little bit more fast tracked for me. So tell me kind of what you guys are doing, and share that with the audience.
Yeah, so we have some levels to training practitioners. So the idea is like, hey, we can train you on everything that is required to get started with ozone therapy, gives you some turnkey solutions in terms of you get free marketing with us through the program. You get a bunch of free resources, and there's a lot of stuff that we offer just to try to make it as good as possible. But there's a few levels to it. The first one is free, which is you can go online to drsozone.com. Under training, there's a tab that says free IV training. And that's just an hour conversation with somebody. And honestly, that works for a lot of people. Like if they already do IVs or some other similar application, like it's really not hard to do ozone therapy from there. People just turn it into a bigger thing than it really is. So that works for a lot of people. The next step from there is that and it's not necessary, but you can. We have a course that's $300 that is 8 hours long. It walks through like everything you need to know about it, has a ton of resources in it, massively helpful. And the third thing, which is the best option because you get the most amount of information, it fast tracks people the most in terms of like, rather than trying, doing trial and error to figure out how ozone therapy is going to fit into your clinic. This is like fast track to, 2 years ahead. So it's these live in-person trainings that we do. We do one every couple months or so, and we have different ones. So like we have one on IV ozone that's coming up next week. The month after that, we have another one with Dr. Tom Levy that's going to cover NAD, high vitamin C, ozone therapy, methylene blue. And that one's more like people who are already doing ozone to a degree. They're not like looking on how to get started. They can go to something like that and get some really good protocols that are going to help them with their clinic. So we have a number of different trainings that people can do, from the injections to the IVs to things like that, that add in other elements to it. And that's really the best way to do it. And that's also under drzozone.com, which is the drsozone.com. So yeah, we just try to build it in a way that's going to be massively helpful for practitioners. So one of my core tenets as far as operating the business is deliver value. So when we're writing an email, when we're producing some information, when we're going to conferences, it's like, how do we provide something that's valuable for them? And that kind of really changes your mindset from how do I, produce more income or grow my business to like, really, I'm here to serve them. So I need to understand their needs and what they're looking for and try to match that up with what I'm providing. So that's kind of the point that we come from to create those.
Very good. Yeah, no, education is tremendously empowering, because once you start knowing about something, then you all of a sudden start to see all these applications when these patients are coming through your office. Like, oh, I wish I would have had this technology a couple years ago. I might have been able to help them back then. Yeah,
I think, like you said, it's very empowering. So it's just like we've gone through so much of this information. So it's like with ozone therapy, like 10 years ago, there was practitioners that really had to dig and try to figure it out. But we've done like all that work now. So like you can kind of just
Right.
come in, and you don't disengage your mind, but for the most part, you're being led along the way of everything you need to do. And, we provide it for you. We have tons of resources that educate on all things ozone therapy. That website that I mentioned has a lot of different articles on it that give kind of the state of the art of, hey, what's the deal with ozone therapy in cancer? What's the deal with ozone therapy in Lyme? How does this protocol work versus this one? And it has a lot of information there. So we've really tried to build out a comprehensive tool for people to be able to use. And so practitioners don't have to go and dig for everything anymore, and just try to make it easy.
No, that eliminates some of the barrier to entry for people to go ahead and get started. You mentioned that you were doing a lot on cold immersion. You want to chat about that for a minute or two? Because I find that very interesting.
I'm a huge fan of cold exposure. So it's called deliberate cold exposure, which is essentially getting into really cold water, going into really cold air, and allowing yourself to get very, very cold. So I actually go into water that's about 33 degrees, full of ice and that kind of thing. And I know it's kind of popular right now. I've been doing it for about 6 years. The thing that turned me on to it was I used to go to Washington, or I still do. I go to Washington in the summers to visit my wife's family, and it would be a nice day outside. This is in the summer, so it might be like 80, 85 degrees, and they have an inlet from the ocean. The water is a little bit cooler. It's like maybe 65 degrees. But I had asthma, so I would jump into this water, and my lungs would constrict to the point that I couldn't breathe and I couldn't talk, and it was just kind of embarrassing because I'm sitting there waiting in the water, just going, trying to get a breath, and people are talking to me, and I'm like, I look like a schmuck over here. So my thought process was, well, that doesn't seem good. So I could just practice getting cold by doing cold showers and maybe some cold baths and that kind of thing, and seeing if it essentially makes me stronger in that respect, that my lungs get stronger somehow. And I didn't know anything about cold exposure, that there was a science behind it, that it's helpful for a lot of different things. I just thought, like, you'd see pictures of people doing polar plunges. I just thought, some crazy people that like to do it for the thrill. Not that there's anything behind it, but just for the thrill. But what I found was, over the course of a couple months, all my asthma symptoms went away. And to date, they're gone. So that got me really intrigued with it. And I was like, what's going on with this thing that I was able to get rid of my asthma symptoms? And I say get rid of my symptoms. I don't say cure, because I don't know, maybe the asthma will come back at some point. But to date, it hasn't. And so I became really interested in cold exposure. It's another one of these hormetic therapies. So we're causing a stress to the body in hopes that it builds back stronger. And so it does a number of things. When you get really cold like that, it creates something called brown fat in the body. And not in a way that's going to make you look chubby or make you look fat, but this is like actually very productive fat for you. So it's more mitochondrial dense, so it can help with energy production a little bit. But the big thing that it does, it's a secretory organ, meaning that it's gonna help to modulate thyroid. Is the big thing that it does. And thyroid is an issue for a lot of people. People are too high, too low, and it helps to balance out the thyroid. The other thing is that it makes you more energy efficient, so you're able to utilize energy better. It's helped with my sleep significantly. It's helped with just my skin overall and reducing blemishes and things of that nature. You can do an ice bath or a cold exposure. It doesn't have to be icy, like around 50, 55 degrees, is a good starting point for a lot of people, which can be like a shower on the coldest setting if you're up north. If you're in Phoenix and 120 out, it might not be quite that cold, but yeah, you can get a ton of benefits from it. So that the fact that I got rid of my asthma made me really interested in it. And then I started posting some videos and got a lot of views on it pretty quickly. I think in December or January, I got over like 10 million views. And then I started to talk I probably had 20 to 50 other people say that, oh, it got rid of my asthma too. And I had that same experience. So there's definitely something to it in terms of that. Obviously, it helps with inflammation and does some good stuff there. But yeah, it's really quite a fantastic treatment because it's a low time investment. I mean, you only need a couple minutes a day to be able to do it. And for me, being busy, having 4 kids, having a couple businesses and doing that kind of thing, it's really nice to have something that's just a low time investment that I enjoy. Oh, the other thing I forgot is it helps release happy chemicals in the brain. So It releases like acetylcholine and a lot of norepinephrine and some things. So it actually is a fantastic mood enhancer. So if I'm actually stressed out, if I do a ice bath, a lot of that stress goes away. It doesn't come back out with you. And it's a really cool, calm, collected, like focus and energy that you get afterwards. So yeah, I'm a big fan of them.
Now, I talk to a lot of people that are really into this, and they seem to be focusing on breath work as well in conjunction with their immersion. Have you looked into that at all?
Well,
like some of the Wim Hof stuff?
I haven't really gotten into that. I know people do it. You do have to learn how to get your breath under control in order to stay in the cold water, because otherwise your body temperature will just plummet and then you'll panic. So just by virtue of doing it, I've learned how to control my breath. So for the first 10 seconds, and if you go on my Instagram, you can see some of these videos. It's Micah for Health, all spelled out. But for the first like 10 seconds, I'm really kind of getting my breath. But about 15 seconds in, I get it under control to where I'm just in a breathing rhythm, and it's very calm and I'm very collected. And so it doesn't take long. But yeah, you do have to learn how to breathe. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to stay in and get the full benefit of it. And it becomes very relaxing, meditative, that kind of thing. But I don't do the surrounding breathing exercises, really. I know people are into them and swear by it. I just haven't gotten into it.
How long did it take you to be able to? I mean, my body is really not very cold tolerant. But,
Sure.
But did it take you a while to get to the point where it's like, oh my God, I'm killing myself this is nice?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for 6 years. So maybe the first couple, I don't know, at least the first few months, I really didn't. It was kind of like every time, like a little bit of dread.
Yeah.
Now I don't really have any. I actually look forward to doing them, albeit for 5 seconds before I get in. There's about 5 seconds before I get in where my body goes, I don't want to get into that water because there's just all this ice on top, and it's almost freezing water. Sometimes it's right at like 32.3 degrees or something. And so I have a few seconds, but once I get in and I put my first foot in, I'm in the zone and ready to go. So, but yeah, it probably takes a couple months, and don't need to start off with super cold water like that. Again, cold showers, even just drawing up a cold tap water bath works great. And if you just really focus on the breath and commit yourself to the process, like it can be pretty enjoyable. I would say if people are doing cold showers, those are actually harder than just doing a cold bath. And I think the reason is because you're kind of switching around in the shower. You're hitting your chest, and then your back is warming up, then you hit your back and your chest starts to warm up. So you're kind of reintroducing this like shock factor all the time as you're doing a cold shower. And I find those honestly more difficult than getting into the 33-degree water. So I much prefer the immersion.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are really swearing by it rather than swearing at it. So that's a great thing. Micah, thanks so much. I thought this was a great little conversation and kind of a way to maybe get some of these practitioners to think about implementing ozone therapy into their practice. Because I think first of all, it's optimal for patient and human optimization. And it also is relatively easy to put into play in a practice situation, especially with your kind of educational modules. So thanks for coming on. And the website for your equipment is Simply O3.
Yep, simply03.com. The starting place, if you're like just getting into it, is usually the Doctor's Ozone, the drsozone.com. Do one of the free trainings or sign up for the guide, or go through some education materials, because usually when you're just looking at the equipment, that's not really the starting point of getting an understanding of it. It's like some of the education that's required. But yeah, I really appreciate it, Stephen. Huge honor to be on your podcast and be able to educate some people about this.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. We'll probably get you back on and talk more about cold therapy in the future.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, that sounds great.
Several years ago, I chose Alpinion as my ultrasound brand of choice after years of experience and research into ultrasound imaging. In fact, I have 2 of their machines. Alpinion has incredible precision and penetration built into their technology that, in my opinion, is simply the best value in all of the ultrasound imaging space. They have several price points to meet your needs, And I can tell you definitively that you'll end up having to pay double to achieve the equivalent imaging quality from other top brands. That doesn't even account for the unlimited software updates and remote tech support included with no monthly fees. Right now, to show their appreciation for the listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, they're offering an incredible discount. Their portable i7 retails for $21,000, but you can get it discounted at most medical meetings for $19,000. But my listeners will get it discounted to $15,900. This has never been offered anywhere for the new portable system with the engine of a console system. Use code SBPOI to take advantage of this incredible offer. You won't be disappointed with Alpinion. I sure haven't been.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.